peak ripeness. So depending on if it's an herbaceous top or a root or a flower, we're looking for that peak moment of, the highest constituent level and the perfect moment to harvest.
Hello and welcome back to the Herbal Skillshare Marathon. In this session, we are going to be hearing from Jeff and Elise Higley from Oshala Farm, who are going to be showing us their skills as herbal farmers in the way that they process and dry and store their herbs. They have definitely developed this skill over the years of running the farm at Oshala Farm, and they are going to be sharing some practical tips that you can implement as well as we all develop and improve our skills as herbalists. So I will let you take it from here.
Well, obviously every herb's different. So we're looking for peak ripeness. So depending on if it's an herbaceous top or a root or a flower, we're looking for that peak moment of, the highest constituent level and the perfect moment to harvest. So we typically will go out and harvest it. Depending on what type of herb it is, the harvest is slightly different, whether we, cut it with knives or we're hand picking flowers or we're digging roots. But the goal is to get it quickly and efficiently out of the field and as quickly as possible to the dryers. Our goal is typically no more than 15 minutes from the time we cut it to the time it's in our drying facility. That's not always possible if you're wild crafting or doing something, where it's further away from your home or something. But we found that if we can get it there faster, we're going to limit, potential problems moving down the line. So then we transport it to our drying facility. If it's a root, we wash the crop. So that's slightly different than all of our other, what you'd say herbaceous tops or flowers are not washed because it just becomes too challenging. But roots, we have a lot of dirt we need to get off. So we'll actually go through a washing process. And then we put it into our dryers. And depending on the crop, we have different temperatures we run it at. Our goal is typically to run it at the temperature that's going to dry it as fast as possible and really maintain the constituents and the medicinal value or the, whatever we're looking for out of that plant without degrading it in any way. So, a lot of it has to do with a lot of airflow, the right temperature, and then that process typically takes anywhere from 36 to 48 hours, sometimes as much as 72 hours, depending on the crop. And then we go in and
then we're also turning and moving, right? Checking it multiple times a day. Finding, like everyone knows, even in their little dehydrators, right? There's different pockets in your dehydrator where it's like, oh man, this one is totally dry and this other section's wet. Well, that's how it is on just like, if you can imagine, 50 by whatever, or 40 by whatever the different dryer sizes
we'll have
are, so
20, 30,000 fresh pounds will go into the dryer. So then having to turn that crop and move the areas that are wetter into the areas that are drier and make sure that we don't have any clumps in the product so that it all dries well. And then
sometimes we have 15 pounds. So it's like, it really varies.
Right. And then, we use a different process for that. We have a screen dryer, more of a cabinet style for the smaller scale like harvest.
A fan up above and a heater below, like just a cabinet style dryer. That's really probably a lot of people listening could relate to, just creating a big cabinet, like a closet, and putting a radiator heater or underneath and having airflow. It's the biggest thing, airflow.
Yeah. We're basically moving dry air through the crop. And we're trying to avoid pockets where the crop sticks together and the air can't flow through, because that's an area where it won't dry, but it could create mold and yeast and other problems that could hurt you down the line. Right. And then, so we're in there, we're turning it, and then we're constantly checking it for the moisture content.
Right. So then we have a moisture analysis machine, and then we check the moisture and make sure it's below 12%. And we're trying to find the driest or the wettest piece in there. So that's always a challenge, depending on how much, weight you're drying at a time. So I always joke that we're paying to lose money, because we're paying a bunch of money to dry, and then we're, the poundage is getting less and less, and then we sell by the pound, obviously, so, or by the ounce. Once it's dry, then we're, it's also a lot of sanitation, which is kind of crazy on a farm, but it's definitely, washing hands and everyone's in there. We have, if we are actually walking into the dryer, everyone has different boots that they wear for each crop or each time, and then it's sanitized in between. Each lot has its own, the boots have to be sanitized in between. So, and the gloves and everything. So that all happens too. So that's important to make sure. And the drying, the dryer itself inside gets cleaned and sanitized between each lot. So that's something to keep I think if anyone's selling in commerce or even for their own scale, they want to make sure that they keep, all their yeast, molds, all the micros have to be down, right? Like you don't want anything that they can't use for medicine, because obviously people are using this for your health and consuming it. So so we test the moisture level, then it's bagged into, depending on what size the lot is, we bag into as much as we couldn't stand it, we had to buy food grade polywoven bags that are non-breathable, because that was the only way that we could keep the moisture content the same as what it went into the bag, pretty much. And it's in that quantity, right? That's the thing where you were talking about, where you get to the point where you want to put everything in a glass jar, and then you have like a whole room full of herbs, or even if you have like a table full of herbs, like what do you do with all of that? And for us, we really decided to invest in storage space that was climate controlled, because we felt like we wanted to keep the herbs as whole as possible and process them pretty much to order. I mean, we do larger bags now in quantities at a time, because otherwise it would just take too long to garble out 4 ounces at a time. But we feel like the longer we can keep them as whole as possible really helps the herbs stay beautiful and potent. And, people can, I can tell the difference. So, basically we started growing for our own products. So we want to send out whatever we would want to consume for our own selves and for our own products. So.
But then getting it to where it starts to dry quickly, because once we cut plant material, if it's stacked in any way, it will start to compost if we don't get air through it. So
and it starts to heat.
Yeah, right? It starts to heat up, which it can be a challenge. We could start having product break down and start having all sorts of detrimental effects from that. So getting it quickly to a state where we could start drying it.
Right. And then I think, like Jeff said, drying it as quickly as possible with enough airflow at the lowest temperature as possible. And that varies plant to plant as well. Mm-hmm. So, and then keeping it as whole as possible. And then in a climate controlled environment where it's not getting hot and cold until you use it.
Yeah.
And without light.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the challenges with glass, is keeping it,
unless it's amber glass.
Right. But still having it where it's not being affected by light or humidity after the fact is really important. But a lot of it comes down to trying to think about the crop itself and what the constituent is we're going after. And, when you look at like mints, like your lemon balms or your peppermints, or these things that have a lot of volatile oils, or very, a lot of fragrance and aromatics to it. A lot of the medicinal value is in those, and they actually burn off at very low temperatures. So, in one part, it's like, use higher heat, we could dry it faster and avoid things like E. coli and salmonella and total plate count, which are a problem that can grow as it's drying. Actually, they can actually increase, but then we're also trying to conserve the medicinal value. So we're in this kind of catch-22 where we want to keep the lowest temperatures possible for that specific crop, but also make sure that we're really, getting the product dry properly and capturing everything at its moment.
So I think that's another thing to mention, is that on our farm, we've gotten to the point where we test, we send everything out. We send a sample out to get a testing done for all the, like Jeff mentioned, salmonella and E. coli and the yeast and mold, so that we know and customers know that it's safe to consume. But on the other hand, that's like $120 for every time you test something. So when you're, you were saying larger scale, we're actually really small scale. We're larger than like a home an herbal, like a home growing, like your own herbalist, but we have like 50 acres in production and actually in cultivation. So it's really small relatively to farming styles, right? Like other farms are growing thousands of pounds or thousands of acres in like one crop. And we grow 80 something different varieties of herbs. So we are doing lots of small batches, and that's challenging because as medicine makers, anyone listening knows, like, they want to make sure and ensure that the quality of the product is the very best and it's compliant with all regulations that they're using. But then it's costing the farmer $120 to get everything tested to make sure it is. So that's the challenging part too.
When you do smaller lots, it's becomes more expensive per pound to go through all those testing processes.
Right.
And
so you have to add that on to the cost of your herbs that you're selling, there's obviously the different parts that we harvest, right? And there's the different tools and techniques that we need to harvest those things. So hand picking flowers, cutting aerial tops, collecting seed, digging roots, and all of those come traditionally at different times of the year. So when we're planning for the year, we can't, so right now it is, the beginning of the season, and in February, we're finalizing contracts with people. And at that time is when we kind of decide, okay, what are we going to grow? And there could be the chance, and even is right now, there's certain crops where someone wants us to grow a lot, but then that means that we won't have enough time to do all of it in that part of the season because we don't have the labor and the staff to do that. So we kind of have to divide up, or the drying capacity, right? Because like we said, it's great fun to grow things, but then you have to have the back end has to be able to, you have to have enough room and capacity to dry everything and to process it into the state that the customer wants. So that kind of dictates some of it. We can't do all roots either because we have a limited dry time in the fall, and then the rain hits in and we have to stop at some point. This year we didn't stop until the end of December, but we like to stop in the end of November, but we were still digging roots. So so I think there's those parts of things. It's part of it's the demand and what people are asking for and the requests that come in, and then what the capacity you have as a grower. And also your land, like different soils depend on what you can grow, and obviously your climate and your region. So that, a lot of people ask us to grow things that we can't grow. So I'd love to grow some of them, like ginger and things, cinnamon.
Well, and I think it's hard too, like, we sell on our website. So it's kind of deciding, well, how much of this are we going to sell? How much lemon balm versus feverfew can we sell online? And the best we can do is look at what we've done historically and then plan for the future. But sometimes we miss the mark and we're out of stock of something, or sometimes we grow too much, and that's a challenge as well. And looking at needs and yield data and timing of harvest and availability for dryer space is all part of the dynamic, so that we fill out the entire season of work and can maximize what we can get in and have available, but also stuff that we know we can sell. Because it costs us money. Every pound we grow costs us money to, everywhere from planting it to weeding it to harvesting it to drying it to storing it costs money. And if we don't sell it at the end of the day, it's a loss. So it's really important to keep in perspective, like, oh, I love growing, whatever it may be, nettle, but I can only sell so much. So it's important to kind of keep that perspective of, what is the demand of the market, or at least our buyers that we have available, and kind of
I think
temper that.
Yeah, I think it depends too on your staffing. For us, our goal is to really, our staff gets paid time off in the winter, but to keep them continuing to come back to the farm, because if we were like a lot of other farms who just let their staff off for the end of the season, they wouldn't come back. And our crew is very trained, and it's a niche farming, right? Not everyone knows how to grow herbs, and it takes a lot of time to train people. So for us, we want to really spread out the season evenly, so that our small crew can keep busy and consistent. Whereas if we only did roots, we'd have this like lull in the season where there's not anything to harvest until the fall. And then what would they be doing? So I think there's that too. Like if you're one person show, you want to only grow enough that you can consistently keep yourself not too busy, but busy enough, or not overworked in, the summer. And then, so there's just those kinds of things.
Flowers is a lot of hand labor. It's all hand picked. So what is your limitation on being able to go out and pick it and being realistic about this is what we can actually get in, and this is how many hours a day or a week I can spend or my team can spend out there picking flowers is, kind of a reality of what your limitations can be. It's easy to grow it. It's a lot harder to get it all the way through to the buyer.
We do almost everything by hand as far as our processing. So that is pretty crazy at our scale of herbs, hand processing, garbling.
Well, not roots, but
all aerial tops. After it comes out of the dryer, when you're talking about, hundreds of pounds, it's a lot of garbling on a screen, just hand processing. So we do pretty just traditional, like home herbalist type of processing for that. But I think that's why our herbs are so well received, because you actually can see the plants and what they look like. We mill our roots because for most of them, and we'll always note that if they're not, like, I think that's really important to communicate with people and the buyers, like what they're getting, obviously. And, you want to make sure that you're providing what they're actually looking for and that they can use it. Like, for instance, we had such a small harvest of a certain herb, and we don't want to, it costs a lot of money to get things milled. So just to mill things, we have to add in like another $3 at least per pound just on milling costs. By the time we ship it to the mill, by the time we ship it back, and then their cost for cleanup and setup. So that,
and they have minimums too.
And they have minimums. So you have to do at least, I think it's 150 pounds for them.
But then there's a setup fee and cleanup fee. So it becomes more expensive per pound if you have less pounds.
Right. So if your lot's only 150 pounds, that's going to be a lot more, more dollars you have to add on. And then suddenly your roots are so much more expensive than somebody else's. But everything else we're doing by hand in-house. The nice thing about hand-picked flowers, and there are definitely some areas not in the US that I know of, but that are mechanically harvesting flowers. But there's, some aerial tops in there, but they're pretty amazing machinery, just a different product. But all of ours are hand-picked, so there's no really processing that happens after that. But all the aerials are we just use screens, and we're just cleaning it all.
And I think that's something that's important is there's really not, you can't go buy herb harvesting equipment. It doesn't exist. There's, some companies out of Europe that have some tools, but for the most part, it's not like vegetable farming or grain farming or other types of farming where there's a lot of equipment available. The stuff that we're having to use is we're buying multiple pieces of equipment and then fabricating it together to try to create something that will do the job. And you can't just go down the road and buy an herb harvester. It doesn't exist.
Well, in the US.
Yeah. Well, even, it's very challenging. There's a lot of limitations on what's available.
And small scale too, right? Like that's the thing. There are some really huge harvesting equipment that are being produced, but they're on a large scale, like farms that are doing, a lot of acreage in one certain crop. Yeah. So, which is not our farm. So we're just really diverse and smaller scale. So it makes it challenging. So a lot of handwork for sure. Don't be intimidated by all the things that you have to do. Because we definitely we look back and we laugh and cry at the things that we've done and how we, we just, we were,
You evolve over time.
Let's just put it that way. So, don't be afraid of starting small or starting big and just learning as you go. It just can be more expensive when you can make, when you go big, you can have big losses, right? And big wins. But so, know what your buyer wants, have good drying space and good storage. And don't be afraid. Sometimes it's great to get outside feedback too, to have somebody come in and see what's going on, because sometimes people will say, well, why do you do it that way? And you're like, oh, well, I don't know, just the way we've always done it. Or, having somebody come in look from the outside is super helpful.
Yeah. I mean, we're constantly looking at other forms of agriculture, just because it kind of ties in and the vegetable world, what, even large scale, agribusiness, we're looking at right now, doing a lot of research, like what are mass potato companies doing to wash and process their material, and how can we maybe copy that, or maybe, use some of that equipment.
For the roots.
For the roots, and maybe we can glean some of that.